Hey guys, we're back for our next week. We're looking at Nathanael this week. We also know him as Bartholomew. And just to sort of introduce him and introduce today, we're just going to unpack who he is, his coming to Christ and becoming one of the disciples of Christ. So getting straight into it, let's look at those two names. Why do we have Nathanael, also Bartholomew, being names that are referring to this disciple? And firstly, we can see it because when we look at the listings, as we mentioned in the past, when we look at the listings, we see Nathanael being listed as Bartholomew. Now, the reason for this is because this was a Jewish name. And this was the Jewish name that was held by him. And it meant son of Talmai, if I'm not mistaken. We can look here, yeah, son of Talmai. And so we can sometimes refer to him as Bar Talmai. But when we look at that name Nathanael, now we've got the name which John, in John's Gospel, writes about this character, referring to him as Nathanael. And a lot of you will know that the word Nathanael, that name, means a gift from God, or that God has given. So that's just to break down his name a little bit. When we dig a little bit deeper and come into the story of how Nathanael came to knowing Christ, as we spoke about last week, we looked at Philip and his close relationship with Nathanael. And because he was so close to him, the moment that he knew that he'd found the Messiah, similar to Peter and with his brother Andrew, there was this immediate instinct to say, I need to go find my friend and bring him, because this is something that'll be relevant to him. And this is where we find Nathanael fit into this story. So we can learn a lot about Nathanael and his character when we look at how he came to knowing the Lord. So now going back to that interaction between Philip and Nathanael, we see that Philip approaches him by giving him a biblical quote. He goes straight to the Bible and he says, we found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote. So in Philip coming and approaching him in this way, we can see that already Nathanael is someone who's very focused on the scriptures. He values what the Bible has to say. And obviously the points and the prophecies that have been made are very important to him. Otherwise, why would Philip begin at this point? So already we can see that Nathanael is a biblically orientated, Old Testament focused Jew. So this not only gives us insight into Nathanael's life, but it also gives us insight into Philip's life. It's very likely that the two were very adamant at learning the scriptures and studying the scriptures if this Old Testament prophecy was so valuable to them. And so we can see already that there's this love and desire to know their scripture before even meeting the Messiah. That's how they knew when he came, that they could be sure that this is the man that is Jesus, that is the Messiah. Remember, Jesus had to prove that he was the Messiah. Jesus doesn't mean Messiah. And we know that. So this was very important for the both of them. And so we can see that scholarship and probably something they shared in discerning whether this was truly the Messiah or not. So now we come to the side of Nathanael that maybe wasn't so positive. Nathanael also has his weaknesses. And we see this in his response when his friend Philip explains to him that this Jesus is the son of a carpenter named Joseph in Nazareth. And immediately we see the prejudice come out of Nathanael. And his response to his friend Philip is, what good can come out of Nazareth? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? And so that immediately just shows us the prejudice that Nathanael had. There was a bias in him. Like, I can't believe that someone so amazing could come from so little. And so, friends, what we see in this response is we see someone going from being so biblically concerned with these prophecies of the Old Testament to someone who instantly just went to leaning over into perceptions that he'd grown up with, thinking of Nazareth being a place that was never worth talking about. And guys, isn't it so ironic that when we look at the 12 disciples and we see that these are common, simple men with a common trade being so significant in the ministry of Jesus, that Jesus himself came from a place just as insignificant. And it just shows us that it's so easy to judge things on face value, looking at people's wealth, looking at their prestigiousness in society, and we like to look at this as a way to value people. And in reality, it's again just a reminder that God doesn't value us based on our possessions and on our status in society. But God values you for who you are and everything that you can bring to the table for His kingdom. And it doesn't have to be millions and millions of pounds of money and whatever it is that we equate value to. At the end of the day, it's our heart that God is looking at, not our possessions. Friends, in our world today, prejudice is seen everywhere. We can look at it today and see that everybody is growing up knowing in their heads that certain people or certain areas in a world, in a country, people live on that side of the railroad. We have that kind of mentality, which is, at the end of the day, only a social construct that has subjective views. That means that we as people have decided to put borders between ourselves because we like where we are. We like being comfortable in the people that are like us. And so naturally, people with our sinful nature, which is naturally sinful, we end up doing these things that show prejudice towards another. And what's important about the subjective part about it means that we are not prejudiced based on the fact that certain people are doing things better than others. It's purely an idea that we have created in our head. There's no facts to prove that certain people are better than others or that certain people are worse than others. And that's what prejudice comes down to. People making a choice to look down and put people in classes, look down on others and put people in classes, which is ultimately a very negative thing for society. And so naturally, this is how Nathanael grew up. Naturally, this is how he was taught to think of certain people from certain areas. And that's the lesson for us there. Not to do this, not to think someone's value is equated to where they're from, what they do, and how they live. But all in all, friends, when we look at Nathanael, we actually see a character who is sincere of heart. Not only when Philip says, just come and see, beyond your questioning and your prejudices, just come and see the Messiah. He comes along knowing that there is obviously something important to see if Philip is seeing something of value here. And this now leads us to this beautiful side of Nathanael. Such a great illustration of just Jesus' interaction with his disciples. And upon meeting Nathanael, there's nothing more amazing than the first words that Jesus says to Nathanael. I'm going to read that to you. So when we go to John 1 verse 47, we see that on his approach to Nathanael, he has something of a powerful commendation to say to Nathanael. In other words, he had the most positive and amazing thing to say just in seeing Nathanael. And what he says is, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no deceit. And isn't that so wonderful? We think of times in people's lives where we want to say nice things to one another. We often think of eulogies when that person has passed. We want to remember all the beautiful things about them. But I mean, could you imagine on meeting someone, you say, wow, you have the most amazing smile. Or just saying, geez, it's just like when I saw you, I just felt a bubble of positivity. Someone who just brought so much positive energy into the room. That Jesus would act this way upon meeting Nathanael. And it was because he knew Nathanael's heart in meeting him. And so there's nothing better that he could do than compliment him on who he was and his character. And I mean, that's so amazing, guys, to see that all he could see when he saw Nathanael was a man who was so driven for God, who was so in love with who God was and what God had planned for him. And that's similar to a lot of us. A lot of us have that same childlike love for God. And I want to say that that's something a lot of us should strive for. Just being able to say, you know what, God, I don't know and I don't understand what's going on right now. But I love you so much and I care about your plans and who you are. So guide me. Let me trust in you more. That's the heart that Nathanael has. And my encouragement to all of you is that we should all have the same heart. So we understand when Jesus is referring to him as this Israelite indeed, he's referring to someone who is genuine, who is wholeheartedly devoted to God. So guys, I'm going to wrap it up right here. Today we've got a short and sweet one, but it doesn't take away from the character of Nathanael and all that we can learn from him. And so what we want to close up our story with is looking at Nathanael and how he ultimately overcame his prejudice. He got to a place where everything that he saw and understood about the world was completely wiped away by the love of Jesus and his understanding of that. And just to reinforce Jesus seeing in him what he said and saying, "You are a true Israelite indeed." When we later read in John 1 verse 48, we then see Jesus say, Jesus answered and said to him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." And we can understand from the story that this place, the fig tree, is most likely where Nathanael would have spent his time in the scriptures, where he would have been learning more about God and devoting his time to God. The title that we've been looking at is The Man Without Guile. And when we look at his faith and his devotion to God, we can see Nathanael is a man who is without error in this regard. And it's not to say he was perfect, and it's not to say that he didn't make mistakes, but there's definitely a lot we can learn from Nathanael, and that's our devotion to God, our devotion to the scriptures, and our devotion to his beautiful word. So I want to leave you with that today. Let's go and be more like Nathanael, guys. It doesn't matter that we have these prejudices and things that are keeping us from the gospel, so long as we ensure that we are making a way to deal with that prejudice. Let's be conscious of who we are and where we have bias, where we are saying certain people are better than others, and approach it with a heart like Jesus. With a heart like Nathanael that says, "Lord, who you are is so much more significant than my understanding of this world." And Jesus proved him wrong. So that's my encouragement to you guys. Be like Nathanael this week. Look at your prejudices and love God and love his word.